Good, thank you. I'm David Hayes. I'm head of the Department of Landscape Architecture. It's my honor to welcome you to this evening's lecture, Out of the Woods, Methods of Location and Detail, to be delivered by Bognár, partner and executive vice president of Kengo Kuma Associates in Tokyo, Japan. This event is being co-sponsored by the Illinois School of Architecture and our Department of Landscape Architecture. So on behalf of our respective units, I want to thank Balázs and all of you for being here, for convening here this evening for what I know will be a terrific presentation because I got to preview the images. So this event is being made possible in part with support from the Stanley H. White and Alumni Lecture and Development Fund, which was established in 1985 to honor the deep legacy of longtime faculty member Stanley Hart White as an innovator in theory, practice, and education. White had a really deep interest in cultural heritage and modern and contemporary design, the relationship between them, including situations in Japan. I have no doubt that he would be deeply interested in Balázs's work and ideas, so perhaps we can imagine him listening alongside us. Speaking of listening alongside, last July I had the pleasure of watching online as Balázs introduced his father, Illinois Emeritus Professor of Architecture Bognár, at a special lecture in Tokyo hosted by AIA Japan. So I'm delighted to be able to invite Bognár to the podium right now to return the favor by introducing his son. Oh. No, there is one. I meant to give this to you.
I am fine.
There we are. No, the people in the back will hear that.
I sometimes lose my voice after a class like this today. Well, thank you, David. It doesn't come very often that I have the opportunity to introduce my own son for a lecture at an institution, I should say, because the landscape and architecture co-sponsors here, but I have been teaching only in the School of Architecture for way over 40 years. However, I do this introduction not only with great pleasure, but as David said, that also with a sense of indebtedness, if I may say so, since Balázs introduced me at a lecture of mine in Tokyo last year. I would also add that, since Balázs is very close to me, talking about him, even if briefly, will be inevitably a little personal as well. Balázs, who lives in Tokyo, Japan, with his family, is currently partner and executive vice president at Kengo Kuma Architects Associates. His role spans design direction and mentorship in and outside of the office, with strong interest embracing the varied relationship between places, cultures, and the environment, both urban and natural. He has been working alongside Kuma since 2007 to lead teams for projects in North America, Australia, and several other countries. As a leading architect, he was in charge of such completed major projects as the Alberni Street Tower, a high-rise condominium in Vancouver, Canada, the Amanpuri Retail Pavilion in Phuket, Thailand, the Rolex Tower in Dallas, Texas, the Portland Japanese Garden Cultural Village in Oregon, and the Red Bull Music Academy in Tokyo. Projects under construction include commercial buildings in Dallas, Texas, residence in Los Angeles, and the Waldorf Astoria Hotel near the Opera House, the famous Opera House, in Sydney, Australia. Projects under development are the Brandywine Museum, the office's first museum in the US near Philadelphia, a mixed-use native cultural center in Juneau, Alaska, and the memorial for the global war on terrorism next to the Vietnam Veteran Memorial and facing the Lincoln Memorial on the National Mall in D.C., Washington, D.C. Official announcement will be out later in May. Balázs lectures broadly and writes selectively about work with Kengo Kuma and Associates, reflecting on the meaning of the office's effort within broader cultural context. Her writings include Ancient Future, Materiality and Place in the Work of Kengo Kuma and Associate, published in Domus 2023, and then Fitness on Connected Fields, Distance, Time, and Conversation, published by Routledge in London 2022. And Kengo Kuma Portland Japanese Garden, published by Rizzoli in 2019, co-written with me, and here it is. That was 2019. Balázs is recipient of several awards, prizes, and recognitions. He was the James W. Fitzgibbon Scholar and the first undergraduate Frederick Widman Prize recipient while still in Washington University, St. Louis. Then recognized with the AIA Japan Award for the interior architecture for the Japanese restaurant Shizuku by Chef Naoko, and the AIA Japan Award for the design of the Portland Japanese Cultural Village, Japanese Garden Cultural Village. I should correct that. Balázs was the president of the AIA Japan chapter in 2025. And just 3 days ago, he received the Distinguished Alumni Award in Architecture at Washington University, St. Louis. Well, of course, what he attended, more about that later. But let's see how Balázs has arrived at where he is today. Although born in California, Balázs grew up here in this community of Champaign-Urbana, where he attended University Laboratory High School, or Uni-High, as we call it, graduating in 1996. Unbelievable, 30 years ago. In fact, even his first formal education, architectural education, started here in 1995 when he attended our summer introductory program for high school students led by my distinguished colleague, Professor Paul Armstrong. I hope somewhere he is here. It would be nice to recognize him for that role. Nevertheless, the start of Balázs's education in architecture goes back much earlier times, when as part of my work, I traveled extensively, often with the entire family in tow. Most of the times, including all my sabbaticals, we spent in Japan. During these times, we were, as always, chasing architecture, places of interest, urban and natural, parks, gardens, and the world around us, since, as the saying goes, all is architecture. Instructive, nurturing, and fulfilling the highest human aspirations. Balázs and his brothers were given a sketchbook each time wherein they needed to record their experiences. Balázs was the one who was sketching the most, filling dozens and dozens of such books with increasingly perceptive sketches. And this habit of his continues today, now as part of his professional work. Very important. Indeed, he is very passionate about it, or I should say, he is passionate about architecture, which is, as we know, about everything. Balázs received his Bachelor of Arts in Architecture degree summa cum laude in Washington University, here we go, St. Louis in 2000, followed by his 3-year studies at the Harvard GSD, where he graduated with a Master of Architecture degree in 2023. Finishing his studies at Harvard, his design thesis professor Jorge Silvetti invited Balázs to join the design office of Machado Silvetti in Boston, where he worked for several years. However, based on Balázs's substantial experiences in Japan, he sought a new path there. He applied to Kengo Kuma and Associates in Tokyo, and upon his invitation in 2006, he continued his career alongside Kuma in 2007. Wow. Well then, the rest is history. And with that, while I still continue teaching, the baton has been passing from me for quite some time. And I think it's in good hands. Thank you. Please join me welcoming Balázs. Give me a hug. Cheers.
How's that sound? How's everybody? It's pretty cool to be introduced by your own dad. I am home. And he mentioned to you that he's been passing a baton for a very long time, and the reason for that is it's a very heavy baton. I am in the footsteps of giants, as you all can probably empathize. The people who nurture us and care for us. You can see there, the reason why I'm here is by virtue of a very long list, a few of whom have made this lecture possible, and I'd just like to say that out loud. David Hayes, Sarah Bartomeus Ferre, Paco Francisco Rodriguez Suarez, Professor Paul Armstrong from 1995. This is more than 3 decades around the sun. With deep gratitude, Kengo Kuma, my boss, my partner, my mentor, my friend, is the very reason why I get to be a conduit for you all. And of course, my parents, Professor Bognár and Binky Borromeo, who are in the audience and for some reason taking different viewpoints. They're not sitting together. That's okay. I guess the perspective is going to be interesting. I would also do well to recognize my high school music teacher, Rick Murphy, who is here this evening, Dave Chasko, Jeff Poss, Henry Plummer, Jim Warfield, Johan Albrecht, Vidar Laram, and Chris Martins from the Department of Art, the Fine Arts, some of whom are with us and some of whom are not. I've entitled my comments, and you should take it as that, not so much as a lecture, but just a series of observations. And people look at me a little bit weirdly. I started this in 1995, which I was 16 years old. That's a little bit of a weird, unfair advantage. And for me, the metaphor is finding our way out of the proverbial woods, the thickness and the density of everything that comes all the way around us. And I promise I'm going to show you some really great things. In fact, there are roughly 150 slides that I'm going to show you in the next, I hope I can push it to an hour. But in the story ahead, I'm going to share with you some insight into our philosophical mindset. And dare I remind you all, it was the Department of Landscape Architecture who invited the fox into the chicken coop. Goodness, an architect in the landscape stage. Well, it'll make sense for you in a short bit. I'm going to share with you some notes on the relationships to places and the communities with which we work, threads and themes, and not merely individual projects, because actually those are not that interesting to you. What is going to be of use is how they're all connected together, and I'm going to show you how that goes, and at the very end I'm going to take you from a single wooden detail, a toy detail, and show you how it can explode into a cosmos of ideas. So I hope in the next hour that we have together, you're going to get to see the baton passed, or let's say me following very big footsteps, and we're all following these footsteps because they're giants, but they're also giants because they are able to keep us on their shoulders. We are building on a tradition, and we're part of a continuity. But if you heard nothing else, just remember this. I am the apple who fell directly beneath the tree. So there you go, and I'm going to take you on a little bit of a story. And first, a little bit of background about how we like to think about space, architectural space. Would you imagine that when Kuma-san first sat down with me, says, Balázs, I'm going to share with you my favorite photograph of architecture. That's pretty astonishing, right? There's almost nothing there that's architecture. You've got a platform, And what you don't see just out of the frame above is the eave overhead. This is Katsura Villa, Imperial Detached Villa in Kyoto, way back from 1645. The reason why this was so profound for me as a 28-year-old going to Japan was that it was not ever about the physical thing. It was about the relationship. My example is maybe a little bit more in the literal backyard, where all that is there that's physical was in fact a parallel series of wooden fences, beyond which there was the great beyond, and we would then wander in through the fields into the wild yonder. So let's take a path forward, let's take a few steps and just see what sort of spatial devices and techniques place us into the mentality. And I do want to say that landscape and architecture, as should be obvious to you, there is no real heavy boundary. And this is really put into clear relief when we go to the example of Japanese spatial tradition. This is my favorite example of a sequence that leads into a temple, the Koto-in sub-temple over at Daitokuji in Kyoto. And in that spatial tradition, anytime you turn a corner, your viewpoint is reoriented, time slows down, space expands. Oftentimes, the procedure or the adventure ahead is as important as the destination, if not more so. And you can see here in the example of the tea garden that sometimes is compressing an entire universe into a very small territory. One, the guest is invited to sit down at a bench, to pause, to take stock of where you are, and then to continue the actually short, but in reality symbolically very long journey to the host's house. And here you can see the example of Sony Tea House that was transplanted to Portland Japanese Garden in the 1960s. That was the project on which I first cut my teeth. And it was really literally just me and Kuma-san. And we would be sitting there on Saturdays and he would be pulling apart models and we'd be marking them up. The client had invited us to design 4 new pavilions for the project. When we visited, we realized that you had to go up a very, very steep hill, an unsafe shuttle drive, which is denoted here in a dashed line, and then the antique gate that was kind of misplaced in the sequence, only to follow a very beautiful, kind of immersive garden up the hill. And for those of you who've been to Portland, the world-renowned International Rose Test Bed is just to the page south over here, a page down, and then there are 140 feet of ascent, only to land in an unsafe yard over there, a kind of service yard, and you have to find the front gate. So our pitch to them was, yes, we get it. We're going to design you some beautiful buildings, but really your project is about a connected single path. And there you can see that we're introducing new elements, a new lower garden, a new connected experience that leads you through to a hilltop at the top of the gates. In Japanese, we call that Monzen Machi. It's usually a place of pilgrimage. In this case, it's worshiping at the gates of nature. So the existing gardens there from the 1960s now had a proper prelude. It was the right mentality to get in there. We've done a lot of these kinds of projects where an entry is tucked off to the side, as in this house in eastern Japan. It's in fact hiding behind the tree and the scrim of beautiful wooden louvers there. Your orientation is out towards the ocean. The framework is very simple. You know that your relation to the beyond is complete or open-ended, and the entrance is a kind of beautiful secondary part of the sequence. Same project, different view, perhaps a little bit clearer in its illustration. We can see where we're supposed to go to that home office. In fact, we can see beyond it through to the framed green beyond, but the pathway is circuitous. We have to wander. We have to slow down. We have to get there by other means, and we will get there. I'm going to take you on a very brief tour of Portland Japanese Garden. Our pathway, this connected pathway, is a single granite set of pavers that went all the way up through, threading through elements of water, a series of auditory experiences, the romance of water kind of trickling down. What most people don't realize, that entire Portland Japanese Garden is a storm drainage system in absolutely beautiful disguise. Pick up your tickets. Walking through, ascending to the hilltop village there, you can see the antique gate in the foreground. And now there's a kind of sequence that puts everything in the right order. No gaps, no interruptions. It's an ascent, a proper meditative journey down from the city all the way into the density of the woods. This is my favorite photograph of the project because it's almost hiding the buildings, or they are threatening to emerge, but they can't quite, just because of all the Port Orford cedars, the Pacific Northwest conifers, Doug firs, and so forth. And you can see the path. It's just winding its way through. Here, a bridge crossing again a landscape that cuts through. It's all shedding the water down through to a storm drainage system. Unromantically, a massive set of cisterns underneath the parking lot. And that's where all that is stored. We have to slough it off because the whole site was effectively threatening to be a landslide. Upon ascent, we come to a space that is hemmed in only on 3 sides. Here, we've gone through, you can see the main plaza there, an empty, full of potential space, a Japanese kind of blankness called ma. And you can see there the territory is defined by kind of an indeterminate zigzagging edge. That zigzagging edge in Japanese is ganko yane. It's the formation of flying geese, all returning V's and incurring corners. We are standing with our backs to the main gate. This harks back to Katsura Villa, which I showed you the almost absolutely threateningly minimalist platform and eave overhead. In this case, we're looking at it from the outside and we're seeing this series of zigzags. I like this as a device because it creates a series of corners that are jutting out. It's a smaller scale, and I like to call the inside corners a kind of the crook of the elbow. And there's a whole series of spaces that are nearly a series of intimate. It's never fully defined. It's a kind of in and out game, a play with the outside. Here, another version of that. You can see the corners stacking up into perspective. It's a relatively large compound. It's modest in scale in reality, but you'll never get the full sense because the scale has been broken down by these zigzags, the corners, the incurring inside elbows. That's a plan of the Katsura Villa, and it's important to you because each one of those little dotted rectangles is the size of a person. Let's say, for the example, for the sake of argument, it's about 3 feet by 6 feet. So you can see there, you can understand the human in the large scale of the layout. And it's spreading in the landscape. We did a similar sort of thing. This is precisely the same scale, and I can't tell you how long it took for me to get these kinds of drawings to line up in scale. And I've highlighted the edges in magenta, so not so that you can see the edges of the buildings, but so you can see the definite, loose definition of the central space. You'll note that the courtyard at the center is not really a pure square. It's shifting, it's challenging, it's absorbing the space all the way around it, so much so that this drop-off, the courtyard there, is a second entry. For those people who come up by shuttle, you can approach the other front door. So here we walked up all the way through. You can see that. Let me take advantage of the laser pointer here. We came up by way of this bridge. We saw this kind of outdoor foyer. We had our backs to the main garden, and we were looking at that space through there. The corners are all open. It's a series of wooden screens, glass that slides open, and has become almost a defining hallmark to how I guide my teams. Everything should be loose, porous, flexible, so that you can invite activity across the perimeters. And we do this time and time again. So imagine that the typological approach is not functional typology, it's a technical spatial typology. We like to engage the outdoors in particular ways that are at once simple in technique, but also full of possibility when we open everything up. And that comes back to this notion that simply all we're doing is framing our context. Here again, Katsura Imperial Villa. Think about this as a typology of framing. And we've seen this in examples, one of my favorite places in northeastern Kyoto called Shisendo. This technique is called shakkei, and for those of you who are interested, basically means that you're taking the distant view and making it your own by bringing it in. All you're doing is framing the view beyond, and this is almost a classical example of that. We've done that in many projects. This is Nezu Museum, and you'll note the relationship is the same, but the width, the lowness, the height, the overall sense of space is different, but that connection to the outside is the same. We can do it at corners. Here again, that residence that I showed you for the entry earlier on. And the version here at Portland Japanese Garden, where in the courtyard had the fourth side open to the existing gardens, and that is this view. Some other things to help you understand why we don't really draw a huge distinction between landscape and architecture. It's going to be a jarring switch. In the US, houses have gardens, and they're almost, in this case, and I don't mean to unfairly poke fun at Fulton, Maryland, because I'm sure it's a lovely place to be, and I'm sure the people are absolutely delightful. But here you can see in this image the series of object-like fortresses that dot the landscape, and the trees and the gardens are very nearly an afterthought, or if we're really being fair, it's just taken time to grow in. But the point is there, landscape comes after. In Japan, the lesson is a little bit more malleable. Here, if you squint your eyes really hard, you can kind of see Murinan peeking in the distance. It's all one, it's open. There is a back and forth relationship. In Japan, the garden has a house. It's the other way around. And here, a side-by-side series of portraits. It's the relationship between how much you let the outside in. Keeping nature at bay versus letting it in. On the left-hand side, you can see it's a fortress. It's beautiful. But the garage is at the front door. You actually have to find your way in through the little nook and cranny. On the right-hand side from Portland Japanese Garden, it's a little bit softer as the sequence has kind of grown in on itself. Just a side-by-side. There is the example of Satoyama, and that is the village that has grown up with the mountain. In the case of this, the village has such a strong relationship to the backdrop that the mountains are material, energy, orientation, wayfinding, protection, a sense of place. Here I'm using Shirakawa-go, it's world-renowned, but you can see there the village has kind of nestled in. There's a little bit of clearing in the foreground, but the material and the kind of geographic, physical location, the relationships there are entirely to the place. I'm going to take a little side chapter and tell you about forests. Look at that beautiful photograph of the forest, and yet that's an unhealthy photograph. After World War II, I'm going to condense history into a really, really short set of things. After World War II, in which the country was entirely oriented towards the machinery of making war, artillery, and so forth, all of those resources, wood had been kind of steered into making all the kinds of things that we saw in horrifying form, and I need not go in that direction, but what it meant was widespread deforestation. To counter that, fast-growing cedars would come back in and be planted, and that's what you're seeing here. Spectacular graphically, but it's a monoculture. In fact, if you were to walk into that forest, it's deathly quiet. No animals, no undergrowth, no variety. This, a little farther along the way, is a healthy forest. And I know you're telling me, oh my gosh, Balazs, that's unfair. It's in the fall. Of course you're going to see a variety of colors. Well, that same forest will still show you the variegation, the kind of softer tones. What this means is, Japan realized that there was a monoculture of forestry, and they said, okay, we're going to take a pause on that. We're going to let the forest grow back in. They had to bring in wood materials for building from the outside, which means that deforestation is now happening overseas, and they had to bring over some of their programs, and I'll get to that in a second. But afforestation, or mishandling of the forests, was a significant problem, and it still is today, and they're grappling with that. On a hopeful note, a lot of these governmental programs instilled in local communities encourage people to learn techniques, to understand the health of the forest, total life cycles, a kind of biodiversity that would be healthful and engendering a kind of really complete and unified way of life in all of the different landscapes throughout the 47 prefectures. I'm going to be zeroing in on Kochi Prefecture, which is in Shikoku. It's the smallest of the large 4 islands. And the reason why that is important is because the mayor approached us and said, Kuma-san, we've got way too much wood. All of the cedar is now here and abundant, but we are losing out to the concrete and metal construction industries. Please help us. We said, okay, we're going to take a trip to that direction. Imagine, if you will, we're on a very condensed road trip there. We've landed in the airport, and now we're all of a sudden in Kochi, so that's what you would see upon entry to the city. One of the more renowned projects that we've done is a wooden bridge museum, because in Japan they can do that. A bridge becomes a complete hybrid function where there's a gallery, there's an artist in residence, and it's really just a bridge that connects the two. But as we see the entire context and surrounding, you see this floating kind of filigree of wood, stacked set of pieces that are overlaid almost like Tinker Toys or Lincoln Logs for those of you who had your childhood in the 1980s. You can see here, there's almost an exuberance of the use of this wood. It's the protagonist, as we like to call it. Here, for those of you who are interested, this is cedar, and it's roughly 6 inches by 12 inches in dimension, and it's stacked up almost in a kind of reverberant reference to pagoda or traditional Japanese architecture. Yes, there's a steel support on the one end, but that's simply just to keep it stable. All of the weight is funneled down to that central pylon in really dramatic fashion. On the inside, more wood. Here you can see mechanical fastenings because the building code has to determine that this is a real and workable fireproof structure, but otherwise can hold itself up. That kind of a joinery, really heavy, staunch, almost muscular wooden kind of expression you can see in the town hall. And as a little aside, Yusuhara is almost like a Kengokuma town. So if any of you are inspired to go there and you really want to see a condensed Kengokuma experience, just in a short amount of time, go to Yusuhara and you're going to see all the projects that I'm about to show you. This one here opens its inside completely to the outer plaza so that activities in the city, festivals and all kinds of engaging things that enable the life of the city, they spill out from the city hall into that. It's effectively a parking lot, and you can see that here. There it is with the facade closed. And alternately, when you look at it, it's got a solid stance, but it's made out of pieces so that light and air and all of these pieces and all these kinds of elements from the outside can come through. So there again in its open form, and there it is with the kind of closed. So you can see there's a sense of being able to be invited into this space even in its enclosed manner. A little farther down the way is this curious building that shows off a thatched, gridded kind of expression on the facade, and here you can go from solid wood almost to the thatch, and I'll show you this in close-up. There it is. It's a market, and again, a place for the community to come together, trade stories, buy the local goods. I believe that there are a couple of rooms there that are available for stay, so it's almost like an inn. But there you can see on the outside expression of a kind of local vernacular. On the inside, the story is entirely about wood. In fact, you can almost imagine that you're wandering into a copse of trees, a few of these branches holding up the ceiling. When we shift slightly elsewhere in the town, you can see a library. Again, a similar kind of gridded component, but what we've done is we've taken those pieces. Each time that we come back and we're asked for an assignment, and for those of you who've been following the dates, you'll notice that it's not chronological. We're coming back periodically, and the relationship is constant. What we've done here is we've taken those pieces, we pulled them apart. It's almost like a staccato barcode on the side, and there it is in its full expression. But what's really great is that when you go inside, you take off your shoes, you can be a kid, even if you're somewhere in your later 40s, and you can sit amongst the tier of books underneath what would almost be arguably kind of an architectural canopy. There the light dappled and filtered through those skylights, coming through all the different pieces that have been joined, almost in a kind of a joyous expression of just making. And the point is that oftentimes when we work with people, it's always with locale. It's always with community. It's always local culture. In certain instances, it takes a much stronger, kind of heavier weight. And I will take you now, this is something that I don't really share that often, except in these kinds of settings. I'm going to lift the lid and show you how we work in our office. Our work is entirely based on conversation. We talk about that within teams, we trade ideas, we figure out what's not working so that we can understand what might be working. What that means is we don't have a single idea that we develop, we go through loads of options, and I'm going to show you that in due time. We share ideas, we talk about what's working, we talk about all of our lessons, we talk about the successes as well as the failures. In fact, I'm doing the same thing down here, and the reason why I'm looking downcast is I'm telling about how I failed so many details at Rolex. I'll show you images of those too. My father had explained some things about drawing, and I still do that. That's my heartbeat, my pulse today. You'll see a few snapshots on here, and while that is my technique of choice, it's just the way that I can move quickly. But it's not to suggest that you have to do the same thing. You will know your tools and your competencies and confidences. It just so happens that when you do take part in the conversation at the office, in fact, you have to do a lot of solo work, deep thinking. In my case, it's very much about drawing. You can see Kuma-san getting down to it, as well as my friend Colby, a fellow graduate who I had hired, and he's one of our key people. We work a lot with models. And I know you all are probably thinking, oh my gosh, what about AI? What about all this sort of thing? Well, guess what? We simulate. We architects only simulate. And the best way you can do that is to build a physical thing. And in fact, Kuma-san's always telling me, Balazs, we can only talk about this if we've got a model. Bring me a model. Doesn't have to be magazine perfect, doesn't have to be gallery grade. Bring something that's clear. Let's talk about it. And don't bring me just one. Let's have your team do a series, minimum 3. That's a magic number. And you can see here, it's everything from chocolate-sized pieces in the palm of my hand, an array, same guy Colby making a 4x5 grid there. And at the end of the year, we've got so many, we have to decide which ones we're keeping and which ones we're throwing away and which ones go into archive. Those conversations continue as an ongoing series of topics with clients, collaborators, craftspeople. You can see there the developer in the upper right. You can see there Kuma-san and I are sort of walking through a house there. And it's constantly going over ideas. It's listening. It's listening. It's listening. What it also means is we got to spend a lot of time on site. There's Kuma-san getting dirt on his shoes. That's cool. We're also checking the color of the aluminum sample up at Rolex. We do groundbreaking. We talk to the craftspeople. And I dare I say, that's Sada Uchiyama, who's a graduate of the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign Landscape Department. And he was one of my mentors for Portland Japanese Garden. Lots of wisdom on this page, primarily by talking to the people on the ground. And I mean that in a literal and metaphorical way. Those close relationships are a long-standing tradition with how we've formed our regional connections. Here in Tochigi Prefecture, and I'm not going to spend too much time on each of the individual projects, but Ando Hiroshige, Stone Plaza, and the Nasu History Museum, all of these are projects in which we were given no budget, but lots of time with the craftspeople, so we could test things and make things thin and refined and show off the techniques of the very people we were working with. There's Ando Hiroshige Museum. The reason why I'm showing this is because this is now with our back to the mountain. Remember I told you about the villages, the Satoyama? This museum is almost entire. Of course, we're exhibiting the beautiful woodblock prints of Ando Hiroshige, but in reality, it's a tremendous gesture linking the city back to the mountain, which is to our back. And that happens time and time again. I'm shifting you now to Miyagi Prefecture, and this is sort of northern Japan. And just as a little foreshadowing, the northern Japan in 2011 had a bit of a shakedown. I'll show you that in a moment. Long-form cultural conversation. These are all projects with varied expression, local, regional materials, regional techniques, regional wisdom. This is one of our classical examples. It's a museum that's half buried, and it's the Kitakami Canal Museum. It's a museum to show off the wealth and the health of the canal. This is the first project that Kuma-san went to 2 days after this incredible occurrence. And as we all know, earthquakes don't kill people. It's buildings that do, or the other after effects, in which case the tsunami. And you imagine me. I'm from Urbana, right? Earthquakes at magnitude 9 don't happen here. By the time it hit Tokyo, it was a paltry 7.9. I was on the second floor of a reinforced concrete building, and I was scared out of my mind. And I said, I want to go home. I want to see my mom. I want to see my dad. I was not joking. Imagine the ground moving at three-dimensional figure eight, and it wouldn't stop for about 1 minute and 45 seconds. Well, guess what? I didn't have it bad. An entire coastline got wiped out. The outline of the country got rewritten. And that's what was happening. This is Minami Sanriku, one of the communities that was hit the hardest. That is the tower there from which the warning signal was called. And unfortunately, the young 23-year-old woman who made the call and saved a huge segment of the population, she perished. And that was, I'm only pointing it out just so that we don't forget. Just across the way is the site of a series of projects that we would be called to do. In fact, I would do well to distinguish that in this case, Kuma-san went to the community and said, what can we do? So I'm going to zoom in on this one. So now we're looking out towards the water, which here is tranquil, but we know yields a tremendous force. I want you to take a look at that low-lying series of roofs over here, and again, I'm just going to help you out here, this cluster. The entire place for the community was wiped clean. There was no place for people to gather, to feel a sense of hope, to feel a sense of exchange. All we'd done was provide them a front porch. And of course, they look like a series of 6 or 6.5 sheds, and they're really simple. And the internal critic in me would say, well, look, this is not really architecturally or spatially that inventive, but not everything has to be. It could be very humble. It could be down to earth. We were involved with them. They told us what they needed, and we helped build it with them. Or rather, they were involved in the construction of the very things that we were helping to enable. Here you can see it's kind of a front porch, and in kind of livelier days, there'd be festivals and food shows and so forth. But basically, it becomes a new town center. There it is at night, slightly a little bit more empty, as architectural photographers tend to like to not include people, but I'm going to try to show you as much as I can. Another project, so you can see here, that's where we left behind, is a bridge that links two sides that was wiped out, and really in this case it's a double-decker bridge that kind of parts ways, and the dimension is such that when people cross they can always encounter each other. This axis shows that. On the right-hand side is a shrine, and on the left-hand side is a grounds where many people perish. So in a lot of ways the bridge is symbolically linking the spiritual to the spirit world. And in this case, people can be in community with all of that happening all at once. There's that bridge. You can see it gently parting ways. And at night, it's lit almost as though it's a beacon, and I showed you that in the previous image there. It's a simple gesture. It's not a kind of work that is overly fancy, but it's meaningful in the way of building the life of that community there. So Minami Sanriku in northern Japan. And if we were to back out, one of the more recent projects is a memorial now, and of course it's a somber theme, but even here the gesture is one of a gateway, of an openness. So here we're looking in the direction, had we just come off the bridge, it's funneling you to a kind of space, a portal to the shrine. And the point of all this is that, and I know I'm blazing through these projects, because you all can see a lot of this on the web and on our website, but what I would like for you to understand that these are not singular projects, they're interconnected. It's entirely built on a conversation and a relationship with a place, with people, and we feel that that creation is a positive spirit, a positive force. I'm going to take you through now. Of course, architects always like to try to be clever with their naming and so forth. So Out of the Woods has a personal metaphor for me about how I'm trying to navigate a lot of these ideas. I'm a bit in a cultural in-between, not just as an American in Japan. I've got a mixed background, but also as somebody who's trying to make sense about all the things that we do in all of the different locations. So of course it's Out of the Woods, but the woods produce a really beautiful set of materials and details that can generate a huge range of ideas. So now let's take a look at it as to be, what if it were out of wood? In the region of Hida Takayama, there's a very strong tradition of joinery and craftsmanship. The toy that I'm showing you in the photograph there is not really particular to the region, but they've effectively refined it. You imagine for a moment that each one of these little modules can fit in the palm of my hand. And they're friction fit. They're 3 axes, and they're each cut in a very special way, so when you slot and rotate them together, it's really hard to pull them apart. It's almost like a mind-bender puzzle. It's one of these things that can entertain a little one for hours, or in my case, the child inside. But here you can see in the black and white line drawing the sequence. You've got 3 axes, they're clicked together, and at the final moment, the last piece is rotated and slotted into place. No nails, no glue, no other adhesives, no mechanical fastenings. It's simply a friction fit demonstration. The slides that I'm going to show you next are really a series of what-ifs. And just I know you guys are going to probably care about, oh man, these are not chronologically in order. And the point is this. An idea develops in its own way over its own course of time, in parallel, stop and start and stuttering. So I'm going to take you through scales. This idea is entirely about one single wood joinery. I'm going to try to show you a few more things, but our office is almost predicated on a kind of childlike attitude, a kind of curiosity about what happens when we can do this. So here, after the earthquake, Kuma-san realized, yep, I know it, I get it, I'm famous, but instead of putting the spotlight on me, I'm going to connect all of the craftspeople whose infrastructure was washed away, and I'm going to connect them through to outlets such as MoMA Design Store and Bal's Tokyo, and produce really beautiful work so that the money generated from there can not only go to support the crafts that were cut off from society, but they can also go into supporting mentees, the kind of protégés, the next in line. Because in fact, it's not a lot of money generated, and this was a support for that. So here you're seeing a modular furniture system, everything slotted into space, so you've got 8 of those joints now, and they're stabilized by the horizontality of those darker wooden insert platforms. For reference, this is about an inch by inch wooden piece, and these are cherry wood pieces. If we were to zoom in a little bit closer, this is now a pine wood, and you can see there the grain has varied, and the the cutting is a little bit rougher, but here you can see how much is cut away from the wood so that when you slot it all together, it becomes solid again. So they're delicate individually, but they work together in tandem. This was done with students in Italy. And each one of these pieces is now roughly about 2.5 by 2.5, let's say, just for the sake of simplicity. And you can see all the joints. You can see kind of the imperfections that are up on screen there. That's not the point. The joint has now gone from there to something that's a little bit more human scale. 2 or 3 people can put these together first flat on the floor, as you see on the left, and then in 3 dimensions in a kind of smaller fitted together module, and then a single archway. When you stack up those archways side by side, you get something that is a little bit more like a pavilion. Pavilions are important to us because they can test out big ideas in small scale and in small manageable ways. Small ideas in the joint, big ideas is when you start to expand them a little bit, and really all that we've done is then lit the result. It's on a platform, but you can get a sense that when you wander through, maybe you're creating a space out of this single toy joinery. That's in 2007 in Milan. What if we go a little farther and we take that joinery and it becomes a 3-story building? This is in Nagoya, or outside of Nagoya in Aichi Prefecture. And work with me on this one. This is a dental research facility and gallery. Because in Japan, such hybrids are possible. On the ground floor, you have furniture-sized teeth, and yes, a Buddha. We can chuckle about this bizarre clash of motifs, but in reality, when you look at this space, and this is it's the structural expression, it's material expression, it's a spatial idea, it's the sense of light, it's the sense of airflow, and if I really were to point this out, the physical boundary, there's the glass, but you would have to really squint your eyes. Yes, there are mechanical fastenings. Yes, it has to be seen by building code as a real building, but it does all of the work. Now, a Buddha next to teeth indicates maybe there's a sense of awe in the everyday. And that is okay. And this is us looking up almost into the infinity, or the suggestion of infinity, where the wood now, it's the same 2.5 by 2.5 dimensions. Now it's cedar. It's a much more robust softwood. And you can see now the difference is that we've painted the end grains so that there's a sense of stability with regard to maintenance. That's especially key on the outside, so that when you go from the outside to the inside, maybe it's a more gradation about how the wood is weathering and aging. Here, of course, in the photographs, it's a picture-perfect, sort of fresh off the press kind of expression. But here again, that is a building that is otherwise solid in its physical reality, but in its spatial dimension is entirely about its being breathable and open. There again, the facade from the outside, and you can kind of see how there's a bit of a kind of subtle shift in how this building is stepping upwards and outwards. Each of them are clipped as though it could keep on going. We saw this project earlier on in the sequence, but now we're talking about engineered lumber. And as I mentioned before, this is about 6 inches by 12 inches, so much more robust. And yes, the joinery has now no longer been this kind of interlocking slotted piece, but the stacking and the expression now goes to our mentality where invention is not by revolution, but by evolution. We're taking baby steps, incremental sort of changes to say, well, what if we change the wood species? What do we do if we're trying to put this function in there? What do we do if the joinery fits like that? So if I were to point out, yes, by goodness, look at that. There's a mechanical fastening, and yes, this slot is much shallower than we've seen before. Here you can see the painted end grains, but the result is quite impressive. And again, this is me, the internal critic, talking, not so much as the person who's been at service for the office for nearly 2 decades. The diagram there on the left is almost indicative of the kind of stacking of the underside of, let's say, Todaiji, the big Buddhist temple where the roof is stepping incrementally outwards. It's the largest wooden building in the world. Here, that lesson is that we can continue to suspend ourselves in space on a single pylon and step outwards, only to provide a bridge, and a bridge that is a gallery space, and there is the person there for scale. But what's more impressive, of course, is the view from underneath the bridge. It's really a display of material purity, of capability, and human invention, and that's really, really impressive on visit. Okay, let's go back down in scale. Let's pretend that we need to take a little coffee break or tea. This is a tea house that's out on eastern Japan. and not far from those residences that I showed you fairly early on in the sequence. Now for reference, the wood pieces are roughly, let's call it almost 3 inches by 3 inches, and they're stacked in a similar kind of expression where they're kind of growing upward and outward. It could be almost floral, it could be arboreal in reference. And I would like to point out one other thing, because here's the testing that's going on. Oh my gosh, Balazs, you're not that clever because there are these tendons, these carbon fiber tendons. Well, the tendency of this structure is to tilt. And so everything is held by tension by those cables, and I'll show it to you. This is supposed to be magenta, but I'm going to trace it over with the laser pointer there. That's basically helping this to be, it's almost like a biological creature. It's muscle and bone. It's the tendons, it's the skeleton, and the only other thing stabilizing are teeny tiny steel columns on the corners that are about 2 inches by 2 inches, if that. And you can see there the result of, it's kind of drier drawing, but there on the side, it's very, very small, very intimate in scale. You can see a person there supposed to be enjoying something there. I don't know, maybe meditating or praying or something. But the actual result is just a floating roof over a cloud of wood that then funnels down to a single trunk. Very, very light, very thin floating elements all pieced together. This is just the further refinement of that wood piece. Let's go to Germany, not far from Neuschwanstein, the inspiration for the Disney castle. And you'll note here that the expression of these wood pieces is much smaller. And again, local woods, all coming from the area. And this rather almost intentional photograph to show the conflation of forest and space with the reflection on the glass really is trying to show the concept that this, in fact, is emerging from the woods. The structure here is not all functional. It's some decorative, but the point here is now we're sort of going in the direction of atmosphere. It's a very pure sort of relationship between us and the outside, and we're, again, underneath the canopy of that wood. Here you can see the rhythm, the spacing is a little bit random, but if we go to a restaurant just down the way, you can see what happened. What happens if we just click everything into place? Let's have everything structured by kind of a reinforcing steel framework, and I'll zoom in on that for you for a moment. The other thing, too, is nature wins. We allowed for that tree to come through, and we built it all the way around. So you can see here, even though the entire restaurant, it's a very high-end restaurant, I can't afford it, but the idea is really beautiful. Here you can see the deck there. It's grabbing a kind of porous, light-filled, covered outdoor space. It's primarily about feeling the sense of forest coming out towards the distant water, ocean views. So there you got a couple of snapshots that are showing that. It's almost whether it's fully outside or inside doesn't really actually matter. But you can see there very, very thin pieces. Here it's a 1x12 approximately. And I'm giving you these dimensions because everything is just sort of breathing. It's kind of expanding and contracting. We're testing how all these kind of layers of wood, all the kind of interconnections can really work to have its own character as a step in that evolution of the idea. Again, remember, it's the wooden toy. It's still the wooden toy. Okay, it gets a little bit weirder, a little bit harder. What happens if we take that same diagonal expression, but now we're layering on a third dimension? Okay. Would you believe, some of you, this is not going to be a surprise to some of you if you've already visited this in Tokyo, but this is a pineapple cake store. And it's got kind of a funny tongue-in-cheek kind of explanation because, yes, it looks like a pineapple. It's a little bit of a Venturi Scott Brown duck architecture where the architecture is what it's supposed to be. It looks like a pineapple, but in fact, it is that same, remember I showed you GC Prostho, this dental research facility? This is the extremely difficult version, and I'm going to give you the term for it. In Japanese, we call it jigoku gumi, which if you translate it literally, is hell joinery. Yes, it's hellish because it's very difficult to make, but it's also hellish because once you slot it together, you cannot pull it apart, and especially in the case of this one. All of the members of the wood are canted at a funny angle. They're not at 90 degrees with respect to each other. This again here is a cedar that is roughly about 2.5 by 2.5 inches. They've been painted on the end grain, and I'm going to show you, think about this for a second, as though the skins of the building were basically a series of interwoven pieces of wood. Again, 2.5 by 2.5 inches, and they are all cut in a very specific way, and you can see the alternating notches. They're the second direction, the third one that starts to lock it into place, this one that has everything stiff in the one direction. They're artificially colored so you can see the sequence build up. It's doubled, so there's a kind of parallel stiffness, and then it turns the corner, so the building is no longer moving in the lateral direction. And guess what? There's a third direction that ties the two layers together. So you can imagine you can model all this stuff digitally, but somebody has to make it, right? Just remember, Everything that you model on screen, somebody's going to make it. Boy, we drove these guys crazy. In fact, the client loved the project architect so much, he hired him out from under us and is now the general manager of the building because only he knows how it works. As is in the recent tradition in Japanese drawings, in fact, it's a section perspective that's been rendered with just enough information so you can get a sense that, as with the GC Prostho Museum, it is the building's skin, it's the architectural expression, it's the character of place, it's the technique, it's light, it's structure, it's skin, it's air. So there you can see when it comes through, even when we're talking about a landing in the building, you can see almost the joy of what's happening on the inside of the building. And that inside the building is very much on the outside too. Let's pull these pieces apart. Again, this kind of clever game. The joints now are modeled in 3 dimensions on impossible angles and axes. They've been pulled apart, almost as though if you were to go to a forest of pine needles and they're all on the ground and you pull them apart, it's like that, right? Like chopsticks or something like that. You will agree with me that they're decorative on the wall, but when we get to the ceiling, they start to grow to become the actual support of the ceiling. There are no columns, there are no rafters, there are no girders. It's this cloud of wood, as I'd mentioned before, and they're all slotted together in these impossible angles, and they were in very close collaboration with the structural engineer. I believe it was Ejiri-san and his company. They've been working with us for a very, very long time. And it's a Starbucks. It's the most Instagram Starbucks in the world, at least by recent statistic. And I have to tell you, I was both dismayed and thrilled to let you know that I couldn't find a seat there when I went a couple of years back. And it was happy because there were people enjoying one of the most ubiquitous coffee experiences in the world, but in a place that it's not repeatable. This is along the pilgrimage path to Dazaifu Tenmangu, one of the really important holy places in Japan, and it's along one of these streets, similar to Portland Japanese Garden, the Monzen Machi, where people would come together, they would gather and trade stories. Starbucks is a little bit of that. If we get out of this world and we look up at each other, this is a place where we trade stories. We sit down, and guess what? Everybody there was so engaged. And I can't tell you that it was because of the architecture, but there was something different. I usually draw my lectures to a close at this funny commercial note, but you know what? It gets a little weirder, and I think I want to show that to you. I've not shown this to anybody else, so you guys are on an adventure with me to the end. This is a pavilion in a park on the western outskirts of Tokyo. And one thing I will point out is that we're now going from structural expression to atmospheric mood. Showa Kinen Park Oka Cafe. This does hold up the roof, but in fact it's really about the way it's emerging from the park and providing kind of an embrace, a kind of enclosure, semi-enclosure for the park. And again, I'm not going to go through in detail on each one of these. If you're curious, talk to me afterwards, or let's poke around on the website. This is my project that was mentioned by my father earlier. This is Alberni Tower in Vancouver, Canada. I am not enamored of towers. That's not really architecture. And when I'm in conversation with Kuma-san, I'm constantly at arms because I say to him, well, really, what's the most important idea about a skyscraper? And he says, Balaj, it's how it meets the ground. And that's probably obvious to you, but we really did that here. We provided a privately funded, publicly used space where, yes, we have a dolly with a turntable that brings out a Kengo Kuma-designed piano, to the outside where we host things like ballet performances, modern dance, theater. All this in the foreground, which unfortunately, because of the horizontal format of the slide, are a series of stepped seating. People can gather around. It's a kind of semi-amphitheater on both sides. And all of this under the cover of this expression of kigumi, which in Japanese means the wooden construction. And because I'm betraying all of the warts and all sort of things, this is not wood. Because fire code prevented it, we had to make it out of wood-printed aluminum. There I said it. I'm going to let you know on the secret. But what happens if we take that same sort of interface with the community? This is now in Taketa Castle town, where there's a beautiful museum, but I'm going to focus on this funny low-budget plaza where it's in fact a parking lot with a stage at the one end, and bamboo has been sort of integrated again as a lattice work that covers the stage. It's the framework for the lighting, it's the mood of the place, and here you can see them actually using it. And there are many, many photographs, but you can get a sense of what that's like. Now we're going to be a little bit formal, a little bit minimalist, and we're going to take that sort of expression, and now those dowels have fallen into almost like an army-like regiment. And here the angles are disciplined, all of the spacing has come down to a module. There's a sort of formality to it, but a looseness of where it's deployed in the space. It's a gallery, and here it's not really filled with the artwork quite yet, but you can imagine there that it's got kind of a presence. Those pieces, if we go to yet the same client, a different location, so here this is in Singapore, now we're in Beijing, those pieces are now threatening to be almost disappearing. These are really, really finely stripped bamboo components, and they've been come down to about a few millimeters by 10 millimeters. That's, let's call it an eighth of an inch of that by about just under half an inch. So almost nothing. And now they're bamboo wooden dowels. And this is the one wall of a procession in a gallery. It's called Bamboo Passage, so there's no false advertising here. It's all made out of bamboo. And now the joinery is done by almost the kind of a pinpoint, tiny, small kind of connection. Very light, curvaceous, almost as though it was just on the physical side of breathing air. This is especially true when we get to this astonishing project, which is those same bamboo strands, and they move with the air. All of them, where you see those pinpoints of light, are in fact an infusion of fragrance, a little repository of perfume, and they're sucked up by the fabric of the fibers of the bamboo. And as you move through the space, you see it move with you, and you smell the fragrance. This is an installation, Sensing Spaces, way back in 2014 in London. And again, it's the notion of an idea now. It's no longer really about purely space, but we're trying to push the limit of a particular idea. If we take that same curvature and we try to highlight it in other ways, I'm going to take you in a slightly different direction. This is a cafe that unfortunately no longer exists. It's a Chinese restaurant in Tokyo, and you can see there it's from a few years back. Here, the key player are those really beautiful, natural, fibrous, kind of dried plant lighting fixtures, but I want for you to look at the background, these bamboo filament screens that have been hung in these gentle catenary curves. Spaced as though they were the backdrop, but in fact, if you were to extrapolate them in their next logical progression, we now go over to Lisbon, Portugal, to the Gulbenkian Foundation, and this is a whole series of wooden slats. It almost looks like it's flexible, but in fact, it's a fixed, anchored place. But that's not the direction we're going. We're taking those bamboo filaments and we're turning them 90 degrees to the side. This is that restaurant that my father mentioned. This is Shizuku by Chef Naoko. Unfortunately, not existing. But all we did, we took the crazy American, the foreigner in the Japanese midst and say, hey, Kuma-san, let's do this. Let's turn it because it's flexible and it's cool. And he says, you know what? It's cool. Let's try it. So it's not that scientific. It's not that rigorous. We have this sense of curiosity about what if. All we did, the only parameter was we turned it 90 degrees. The fabricator of the sudare, as we call them, and you can see they're semi-translucent. He loved the idea so much he called me up and he says, can we use your idea for our showroom? I said, go for it. And he was able to do it on a much, much bigger territory, looser, bigger fluid lines. He's also made the lighting fixtures out of that. And now if we go over to take that same, but we've replaced the movement with more of a fabric. This is a sushi restaurant in London by one of my seniors, or my senpai, called Javier. He's a Spanish fellow. He's almost out of the office, but he's been a wealth of ideas, including almost the theatrics of a fire emergency stair at Casa Batlló in Barcelona. At very low budget. It's aluminum curtains now. The material is changing. The fluidity is the same, but it's expressed in the same manner as you saw that Bamboo Passage or the Sensing Spaces place that I showed you in London. And again, there's a kind of theatricality in an everyday space. Yes, it can be honorable. Yes, it can be dignified. But now what happens if we put that on stage? And now the theater is real. This is a performance center. It's a rather well-regarded performance hall in Italy. And all we did was you take those folded fabrics of different translucencies, layering them, lighting them in a particular manner, because guess what? It could be that simple to achieve a level of magic. That same almost ephemeral quality of the fabric that's happening through there, would you guess that this was a temporary, almost a moment in time bathhouse experience, and all we simply did was drape fabric suspended between bamboo stalks. Almost nothing, but so much, and there's so much in terms of cultural, spatial, dimensional, almost a kind of philosophical existence in the middle of a bamboo forest. Unfortunately, it no longer exists, but so you can see here, it's been captured by a couple of really beautiful photographs. So I've taken you from the wooden toy through to some fairly wild ideas, but in fact, they're linked by a genealogy of idea. And we might almost argue that it goes all the way back to Katsura Villa in our way that we're relating to the outside. So there's a kind of evolution, and I know I'm showing you snapshots along the way. But that is generated by place, by relationship, and conversation. So it's a big journey with small steps. And are we really out of the woods? And I ask myself all the time, especially with regard to how we find our way. Because really, what I'd mentioned to you with that photograph of Shisendo and the Koto-in about the pathway being almost as important as, if not more important than the destination, maybe it's not necessarily about the end result, but how we get there. And what I've tried to do is to open the entire treasure chest of all the things that we tend to do. Again, we are a work in progress. We are wildly enthusiastic about how we go about things. I'm going to show you this image again because it's almost a single move that traces through, and you can see a floating white, almost a kind of spirit or a ghost that's wafting through. And I'm intending that by way of mine, which is Meadowbrook Park. I took a walk just earlier this afternoon, and I try to go there every time I visit Urbana. But for me, it's this sense of spirit. And it could be traced back to Genius Loki, Christian Norbert Schultz. But in reality, it's the kinds of things that generate you and your ideas and how you are pursuing things. And I would encourage all of you in the room to continue asking questions and not worrying about necessarily the answers per se, because they do emerge with those evolutionary steps. It's about place, it's about people, it's about conversation. So do we need to be out of the woods? I'm not entirely sure, because maybe it is the adventure that counts the most. And I know that in front of the stage, in front of my parents, in front of you all, I do feel like the hometown boy. And I feel a lot of positive pressure to help pass that very weighty baton that I've been given for a very long time. And I now yield the grounds to you who follow. Thank you very, very much.
Well, Ash, thank you very much. My imagination has me living in a pineapple cake shop right now, or in a great hall with 3 giant teeth and a Buddha. That would be amazing. We have a few minutes for some questions. If anybody has a question, I have a microphone here that can help you be heard by everyone. Anyone want to jump in with something? Ideas, questions, responses, reactions?
Just
thoughts?
remember, no funny questions, only funny answers.
Yeah. Just if you do, raise your hand.
That's okay, it's Monday
Everyone's
night, they
shy.
want drinks,
What
and
the-
yeah, that's great.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for this really inspiring presentation. Definitely learned a lot from how to dealing with material and the relationship between nature and materials. I guess it's just a very silly question. Unfortunately, I had to ask silly questions.
You have to ask it now.
How do you deal with time and creativity as designer? Because I know many of us in this room are students. We are constantly feeling stuck when it comes to a new idea or being innovative. So do you have any advice, like a suggestion? How do you deal with that? And also with members or people on your team as well?
That's such a hard question because I'm constantly grappling with that. And when I first embarked on this journey with Paul Armstrong, and then obviously much earlier than that with my parents and my father especially, it's where does inspiration come from? Sometimes I was in school and I would just sit there saying, I just want to design some cool stuff. And I had a worse word for that, but I just want to just design some cool things. It's okay to listen to what's inside. Whether you like something or don't like something is almost beside the point. The real question is why or why not. And the more precise you can be with yourself about why you feel that you are compelled to go in a particular design direction or not, the more precise you can be with yourself about that, the more empowered you'll feel to say, okay, well, maybe actually if I'm consistent about this particular idea. And I tried to show that with regard to this wooden toy, right, this chidori. Because in fact, it can yield a number of different directions. You just have to follow one of them. As far as time is concerned, well, there's the very practical thing about how much time you spend thinking and doing and so forth, but you got to give yourself time to rest. Now, I've been doing this a while, and architecture schools don't really teach you how to manage your time all that well. So that's a skill that you have to learn, and you have to do yourself service because it's important. But when you talk about time as a material, that's a much harder thing because it's unpredictable. And that's where you really have to understand local knowledge, wisdom from the place, how craftspeople have been dealing with those kinds of materials for time and time again. using that phrase intentionally, that way you can understand what's appropriate as a response. You know, luckily or unluckily in school, you don't really have the constraints of budget or schedule or any of these other things, client demands and so forth. So you've got a kind of intimidating range of possibility. You can just go with it. Luckily, when you do have constraints and limitations, it becomes a little bit easier in that sense. Some things are given to you. But my answer to you is not really an answer, because far be it from me to give any advice. I'm only just a few cycles around the sun ahead of you all. But it's a constant search, and it's always going to be something different on each project. The terms shift, the people are different, your cares and your priorities are always changing. It's okay to have doubt. It's okay to love something. And the real question is why, or why not?
Thank you.
Not silly at all. I used to be shy. I couldn't do this, 20 years ago.
Anyone else? Just, this is your moment. Yeah? Okay. Yeah, you project well.
I bet they do. You know, in Japan, the kind of public behavior when it comes to particular kinds of things, when you're in museums and so forth, is a very different kind of scenario. I'm willing to bet you that those kinds of structures wouldn't be really that easy or possible in the US, just because we have a more robust relationship to nature, and our curiosity is very direct, especially when we're kids. Yeah, sure. I can imagine that's the case, and great. If you do it, that's good, but you'll definitely get in trouble.
So I was really interested with you talking about natural disasters, and I was kind of wondering if you design specifically for those natural disasters to happen and for your buildings to potentially be destroyed, or if you design for them to withstand those disasters.
Yes, we try. Nature is going to overpower everything that is there, and in our ideal world, we would let our architecture sort of fade into the ground. And guess what? A client doesn't really like spending money on an architecture that's going to deteriorate and decay. So that is a kind of a philosophical question. Yes, we have to design for earthquake code, and yes, we have to design for, people call it resilience, they call it sustainability, but in reality, we're trying to be good to the people we're designing for. In Japan, resilience means certain things, and elsewhere in the world, it's going to mean other things. You can't predict nature. So there are things that you can do responsibly. There are things that you can do, people call them best practices, and I hate corporate speak, so I'm not going to go in that direction. But there are things that you can do and you can try. When you're faced with a 9.0 earthquake and you've got tsunami that wipes away most of the eastern coastline, architects really, there's the best you can do, but the question is what comes next? What comes next? And so that's why I feel it much more valuable to talk about the relationships of those places, because they effectively were leading the design conversation. We were catalysts, we were enablers, we were sort of vessels for their conversation. We had experience that we could put to use at their service. And even Kuma-san was saying the big difference is that we approached them. There's some people, in the case of Yusuhara, they said, we got a lot of wood, we got to build some stuff out of it. But in the case of Minami Sanriku and Tohoku, it was us going there and said, you all were the basis of our first stages. You spent so much time and effort. Now we're going to do our part. So it's a great question. If we can solve it, boy, by goodness, we're in good shape. But it's going to be a constant search.
Balash, thank you so much for
You're
a
very
wonderful
welcome.
lecture. Audience, thank you so much for your wonderful attention, and have a great evening. Thanks.
Thank you for bringing me out.